Happy Friday, folks, and welcome to episode 27 of COVID Chats. My guest today is my mom. Nancy is the academic director of the Alan and Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life at Rutgers University, as well as being an associate professor there. We discuss what this crisis has been like as a professor, a historian, and as someone who recently published a book. There will be some links below to the book and other press my mother has done for those who are interested. Now, on to the episode. Hello, Mom, and welcome to episode 27 of COVID Chats.
Hi, Ruby.
Great to have you here. Great to talk to you, of course. This is funny, a little odd for me, but couldn't resist the opportunity to talk to you on the program, considering the many different angles that I think are worthy of being explored. But before we do that, I'd just like to ask, how are you? How are you doing? Sort of get the general catch up, even though I have a certain sense of it, but I'd like to hear it from you again.
I'm okay. I think actually it's getting, I think I started out sort of strong with this whole shelter in place thing, meaning I felt lucky that we are healthy, that we have food, that I don't need to worry about the most, a lot of the things that other people have to worry about, meaning I'm employed. I don't have those anxieties, which is huge in light of the fact that so many people are vulnerable economically. Many people don't have access to food. They have people in their families who are sick. Those are such overwhelming problems. So I felt very, very fortunate. And I think as this goes on, the weirdness or the surrealness of it and the sense of isolation is weighing on me. So I'm pretty fine.
Right.
But subjectively, I'm kind of wondering, how long is this going to be? And what's the city going to be like? A place I love, my home, and when am I going to be able to see people again? All those kinds of things are, I think they're beginning to take their toll, actually. But, try to keep it in perspective that this is kind of where we are in the world right now.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, I'd say I kind of feel similarly. I think many people do. I mean, at the beginning, there was a real sense of solidarity and people were, trying to make the most of being inside. And, there was Zoom happy hours and, people were calling their friends and whatnot.
Oh,
and I think it does wear on us over time. And, that was something you mentioned before about missing New York City, a place you love, a place you lived for a long time. But, I'm wondering, are you still, happy that you have been able to be outside and upstate in the countryside and in nature during this, as opposed to in the concrete jungle?
Well, look, the answer is, I mean, because we've force fed you nature your whole life. I mean, obviously we're in a beautiful, beautiful place, but even here you feel the sense of shelter in place. People are not around. All the relative small numbers of businesses here are closed. The cultural events that we love up here are not going to go on this summer. So, the theater, the music, the kind of hiking groups, all the kind of things that make us thrive up here are actually going to be altered.
Right.
And that's very upsetting. And it means the people that we love to interact with or our friends up here, also everyone's sheltering in place. When we go to get groceries, everyone's wearing masks and wiping down their groceries. So, you feel it in a different way, but we feel it. It is New York State, and
sure.
Governor Cuomo is talking a lot about what's going on upstate and the fears upstate about the pandemic kind of expanding here and the different kind of medical care. So people say, oh, great, aren't you outside hiking? It's like, well, no, not really, because a lot of the first responders, a lot of the environmental workers up here some of them have been called downstate. And also I'm working, so there's always a tension between what I need to do to relax and what I need to do to work. And I also have the challenges of the internet up here which makes some of the work I need to do a little bit more challenging, actually.
Right. Yeah, that's been a big dividing line, I think, for a lot of people, has been internet access and internet strength. That's very complicated, of course, when there's multiple people who need to get online and they need to get online at a certain
Right.
time. And,
Right.
so yeah, so that's a nice transition. As a professor, you need to use online, you need to upload classes and interact with the students. How has that been? I mean, of course, it's, we're nearing the end of the semester finals, but, this change happened while there was still a good chunk left. How was that adaptation? I know I helped you a little bit with Zoom at the beginning and switching over to Canvas, but.
Right. Right. So first of all, I want to say, I want to just give a shout out to my colleagues and to me, I guess. I mean, we had to transition very quickly. Look, there's some people who are more adept at it because they had already had hybrid classes, meaning both on-site and online.
Right.
Some people had already adapted to fully online classes, but I had never done that. I mean, I've used technology, I use video, I use PowerPoints, but I like interacting with students. I'm also very comfortable talking in front of a class. I know my material very well, but I had to transition very, very quickly because we went on spring break a little bit earlier than we would have, 2 days before. And then immediately after spring break, everything was remote. So it required a big learning curve for many of us, myself included. And the big difference is that I had to prepare my material in a different way because I taught my classes asynchronously. And I did that both for the students and for myself, which was that I assumed that many of them might have internet problems. And I have internet problems. I couldn't guarantee that the system wouldn't crash in the middle of the lecture. So it meant doing prep for the lectures and also to be in sync with the presentation and having the primary sources highlighted. It was a lot of work. I'm not really complaining about it, but it was a different way of teaching. And then I would ask my students to ask me questions and then answer the questions in a document for them. So I think for the students who were attentive, they got a lot out of the class, but it wasn't the same.
Right.
And I kind of miss them, and I miss being able to say goodbye to them and wish them well. And one other issue about this is that as part of the Department of Jewish Studies, we have an award ceremony, and we did it virtually yesterday.
Oh.
I mean, it came out pretty well, but it's hardly
right.
What we're used to. And I mean, I could talk a lot about the challenges to higher ed, and I think what this pandemic is going to do, or rather how it's going to shape it. I think that the digital divide issue is huge. It's just huge. And also the divide between the great public institutions and the small private institutions, and resources and what students have. All these things are kind of, the pandemic is exacerbating the social fissures that many of us knew already were there, but it's just making it that much more apparent. And of course, we're all concerned about the fall. We just don't know if we're going to open in the fall.
Right. Yeah, that leads me to that next question. I was wondering, what are the current thoughts about the fall? Are they thinking, what has Rutgers told you? Are they thinking maybe a hybrid, part online, part offline, or strictly online for now, or it's just uncertain until there's more information from Phil Murphy and the New Jersey government?
Well, I don't know if it's even Murphy and the New Jersey government. I think
federally,
everyone is waiting to see about the partial, May 15th, it's this magic date about partial reopening in the Northeast. I think everyone's taking their cues from Cuomo, not from Phil Murphy. But no, I think the truth is that no one knows. No one knows what the partial reopening is going to really look like. And also the effects of it. I think one of the great concerns, and I'm not alone and I'm not an epidemiologist, is that there's going to be a second wave of this stuff. And if there's a second wave, it could be potentially more disastrous. And until we have testing of everyone, and until we have more optimism about the vaccine, it's going to be very hard to open on-site learning and dormitories and sporting events and cultural events. So I think the contingency plans for virtual everything has to be part of what we're doing. And you know this, but besides my teaching, I run a center, the Alan and Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life at Rutgers. And we have public facing programs, events, including a huge film festival that is a major cultural event for Central New Jersey. And that's in November. And in November, are we going to have movie theaters open where people are going to come in and sit and meet with one another? We don't know yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty, which creates a certain degree of both anxiety and forward-looking planning. But there's a lot to do. What kind of platform? How can you do a film festival that's virtual? What kind of platform do you have?
Right. Yeah, no, it's definitely, there's a lot of questions for that. When I had Brad Rothschild on, the documentary filmmaker, I spoke to him about his movie and his documentary and what he was doing in the wake of canceled movie festivals and things like that. So certainly the shift online is complicated when it comes to those movies. But yeah, I guess I was wondering maybe if there was an inside scoop or something that Rutgers had told you that you could share with us, but it doesn't sound like it.
Well, no, I'll tell you, to be honest, we are one of the challenges of the pandemic from where I sit is that the amount of email and the changing nature of it is completely overwhelming. Look, the semester is now over. I haven't graded my students' exams yet. I'm getting them tomorrow. So by next week, I will be done with my teaching for the spring. But until now, that has really been my foremost priority, is being there for my students, producing an online course that was comprehensible. But meanwhile, we are bombarded by daily emails that come from every aspect of the university. And ranging from mental health issues for students, mental health issues for staff, and it's all very important.
Sure.
To contingency planning for the summer, contingency planning for the fall, grading policies, finding students who are AWOL, staff changes, the hiring freeze. There's a complete freeze on asset allocation at Rutgers, which has an enormous effect on the Center for the Study of Jewish Life, because we need to pay people to do things for us.
Sure.
And it has a personal effect on me in terms of my promotion. So I have to tell you, keeping abreast of that stuff, you just can't get through all the emails. So there might be an email that's telling me something about the fall that I actually haven't read yet. But I do think no final decision has been made. I think every major university is trying hard to figure out a contingency where they can open in the fall, because it will be very difficult if they don't open. And that's not only Rutgers. That means all these let's talk about enrollments, all these high school seniors who are expecting to move out of their parents' house this summer and get driven off to their dorm rooms. That's not going to happen. Right. And I don't need to tell you the economic consequences, let alone the disappointment factor, the family issue. It's so big that no one really wants to call that right now, but they're going to have to call it pretty soon.
Right.
Call it pretty soon. In my personal life, it's not going to have that much of an effect, right?
Sure.
So I'll teach online, or my colleagues will teach online.
Right.
But for the students, I don't need to tell you, it's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah. No, it is. I've talked to, some friends of mine, and they're wondering themselves, what will it look like in the fall? And yeah, I've read enrollment is down, and I'm sure, you know that too. And that seems kind of obvious. An article you sent me recently, William Deresiewicz, who's an author, a writer, and a board member of the gap year program I went on, was emphasizing how now is a great time to take a gap year, even if it's one you do at home, because most students aren't, the idea of an online education and not being on campus is very attractive. And I get that. So I think that certainly makes a lot of sense. Great time to take a gap year. Good for the gap year community.
Right. The problem is money. The problem is the economics of it all, true. Right? The gap year is another year of cost to parents.
Right.
This is not, I know we want to talk about COVID, but I feel so strongly about mandatory civil service. And I actually think if we had a different political will right now, that would be something to talk about. Like, what about all these high school graduates? They need to do something. They want to be productive. They want to get out of their houses. They want to get out of their parents' hair. They want to feel independent.
Right.
I mean, COVID-19 makes it difficult to imagine what that would look like in terms of the health. That's the problem. But, this is a good time for people to give back to the society. The society needs it, and people
Certainly.
need to be busy. But anyway, these are very large questions. In terms of university life, though, it would be hard for a parent, I think, to justify spending a lot of money on just an online college experience for the first year if that's not, what they wanted, if that's not what they hoped for. So I don't look that, again, for me, I'm on the other side of it. My children, as you know, are done with college. So, but as you also know, your sister had to finish the second half of her last semester of her master's program, which is an intensely on-site program,
right?
An architecture program online, remotely. I mean, not ideal. And your cousin graduated from a Big Ten school, and her last semester of her senior year in college, the half of it was remote. It was, terrible. Terrible in terms of the expectations.
Certainly. Yeah, no, I mean, it was tough talking with my cousin, Emma, about that on the program. And I plan to have Miriam on next week to talk about, that element of finishing her master's in an online format. And certainly, to the civil service point, I agree. I mean, now would be a great time to have a program like that where people could do something that would be beneficial to those who have been hurt by the pandemic. I don't know exactly what that would be. I'd like to say help with testing of some sort. But of course, obviously, the testing right now is not in a good place. We just don't have enough of it out there. And, there's multiple different types of tests, and the accuracy is an issue. So, and of course, can the basic, American high school graduate help with testing? Are they even capable of it with the skills that they have? What could people do to help the pandemic? But we have to keep in mind there's still all the other issues that we have in America besides, that in some ways COVID has exacerbated, but also that exist regardless. So we certainly, I'd like to see something like that. Who knows if that will happen, but the political will may change, which, is a prelude to something else we'll talk about later. Last thing I'll say about something you remarked about the many emails that you get from the different, parts of the university. I think it maybe would be good. This could be pitched to the university in some regard, but an email newsletter akin to Morning Brew or Axios that sort of summarizes all of the little bits and pieces that you need to know and distills it in a easy to read newsletter, as opposed to, mass emails from every branch of the university. What do you think of that?
Well, I think there is like a Rutgers Today thing.
But is it good? Do you read it? Is it easy to read?
Well, there's the Rutgers Today that I think is sort of news magazine-y, good, interesting stories. Right. I do usually glance through, and they're sort of wonderful.
Right.
I
but
think
the essentials.
But I think one of the problems is that I know what you're saying. It's just a massive university with 3 campuses.
Of course.
And then various schools and units within the Rutgers New Brunswick campus. So, but it's not only that the university, I also get things from the union. It's like, I'm in 2 faculties. So I get from the history department, I get from Jewish studies. I'm on, the Film Festival Selection Committee. We're doing an e-blast every week. I mean, it's just the amount of stuff to read through when you're an active faculty member. I don't think people really know that, so it's not busy work.
Of course not. Yeah.
Well, we're trying to hire, we have visiting scholars, letters have to go out to them. And the policy keeps shifting. So how do you appoint someone next year? It's all contingent on university funding. So I don't know, there's just a lot. I want to just say a shout out to Brad Rothschild, if you don't mind. So his film is one of the films that we'll consider. And, because Brad Rothschild is local, and because the protagonist of his film Tamar Manassa is so out there
Right.
with social media. I could envision, if the film is selected, of doing a sort of small, what we're going to, I think, if we have to be virtual, it would be the kind of thing where the film would be up for like a week or something. We would pay for rights for it for a week.
Right.
And there would be then a virtual Q&A meeting with Tamar and with Brad. I might moderate it, or Karen Small might moderate it. I mean, it's not the same,
of course not,
as being in the room with them.
Of course not.
But, and I think the bigger problem is the big screen versus the little screen. Is that, most people are going to be streaming the films on their iPads or their monitors of their computers. Most people don't have screening rooms in their homes. Some people do, but most people don't.
Sure.
So I think, unfortunately, from an artistic point of view, it's
Absolutely.
a drag.
Absolutely.
It's a real drag. It's not, the Q&A with Brad and Tamar could be great, but it's that the artistry of the film, all the care that went into the shots, and that'll get lost for most of us. I don't know. I need to tell you, I hate, I see people on the subway looking at movies on their phone. You want to yell like, you idiot.
Yeah, no, I agree. Movies definitely meant to be viewed in the movie theater. Hopefully that will come back at some point. A final question for you in terms of the professor angle. Did you see any of your older colleagues, or vastly older colleagues? How was their transition to the online? Were any of them considering retirement, or was it too difficult a transition to make?
What I would say with my colleagues who are working, everyone stepped up big time. Some people taught synchronously. I mean, one of my colleagues has a class of about 80 students, taught it synchronously, and there was an open Q&A. 20 of her students joined regularly. I mean, I thought that was great. She had reliable internet. What I've heard from people I know who've already retired, so, people I know, their response was, thank God I didn't have to do this, but they had already retired.
I see.
In general, teaching has just changed radically. I mean, if you had told me 20 years ago that I would be regularly using this thing called PowerPoints, I wouldn't have known what you were talking about. My professors walked into the classroom with notes, right? Yeah. And talked, and we took notes. Right. We didn't take notes on computers. I mean, I don't let my students take notes on computers now, because all the research shows that if you take real actual notes writing, there's better retention. But no one I know has said, oh, I'm retiring now because of this.
Because of this. Okay.
I mean, there may be some people out there, but I haven't heard that. And I have younger colleagues for whom this is the norm. They can't believe that we don't know how to Zoom, or
right.
They're like, get with the program. This is how students learn.
Right.
But so
I think I think for younger, there is a lot of online teaching going on. There's a company, OutSchool, which is hiring, many teachers to teach online and, give all sorts of different classes online. And I think we might see, this could see a push towards becoming a teacher.
Definitely.
For people who aren't comfortable being, in person, or didn't want all of those other elements that go into teaching in person, and like the online aspect.
Well, I think what's going to happen, I guess my fear, this is again a larger issue about the changing nature of higher education, but there's already been a great push to online learning. There's some debate about whether or not the metrics or the data is accurate, but for many universities, their argument is, well, we spend all this money on buildings and maintenance of buildings, and if you can do this and get students from abroad, or, we'll make more money that way. I'm not sure they're right, and I'm not sure they're wrong, but certainly the challenges going forward, particularly in the pandemic, that a lot of American universities are going to lose a lot of money because international students are not going to be coming. Yeah. So because of the pandemic. So the question is, are they going to be able to retain those international enrollments, and how are they going to do that? Will, the Chinese student, pay top dollar to go not only to Rutgers, but to say, Yale or something, or Harvard, if they can't have the American college experience? So there are a lot of questions, but there's no doubt that in my case, personally, the university may say to me, you've done this, you've taught online, Don't tell me you can't teach online anymore. You can. I've seen you do it.
Right.
So you have to do it. And I think I think that's inevitable.
Interesting. I mean, I do agree with you in some regard, but I think there will be, I mean, if the pushback is strong enough from students and an enrollment seriously drops to the point where it's, you know, a tremendous loss for these universities, I think they will, you know, do their best to get things back in person and sort of keep them that way and keep the quintessential college experience to a certain degree intact, because it's so, you know, attractive and valuable for students. And as you know, alluded to, it's a big reason why international students come to America for that, you know, American experience. Call back to the movies, the American experience that's expressed in movies, whatnot. But yeah, we'll see. Of course, you know, it's hard. I don't want to be too predictive on the program because yes,
No, I don't think we
right.
know. I really
things
don't
change, right? Things are changing so rapidly. So moving forward to, you know, your role as a historian, I have some historical questions for you.
Wait, I just want to tell you, I don't know
Yep.
if you're supposed to say this. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it bobbled. I don't know if that's your internet.
Oh, there was some lag. Okay. So yeah, I'll just repeat, no problem. So basically I want to shift forward to some questions I have for you regarding you being a historian, thinking about the historical perspective of this program. That was part of the reason I chose this angle of the apartment. One, to give you a different angle of the apartment that you miss, and then also for the globe in the background, the global perspective, if you will. So,
Hi, globe.
hi, globe. Yes.
I love that globe. I love
know.
globe.
I remember when it arrived in the house. But moving forward, so are there elements of this crisis and the poor political response that conjure up other moments in history for you? And then, you know, perhaps are there moments perhaps that Lucy Davidovich, who you wrote about, who we'll get to, encountered and recounted that you wrote about that parallel maybe in some way?
I work, as you know, I work as an intellectual cultural historian of the Jews of Eastern Europe. So, but I'm not a historian of medicine, although I have to tell you, you know how much I love history. So like, just, that's obvious. I mean, it does sort of spark in me. I'd love to be reading more in the history of medicine now. I mean, I think just generally it's a great topic. You know, you had a professor who's a colleague of mine, James L. Borgo, who's an historian of medicine. And I have wanted to read his book for a long time anyway. But, you know, he didn't write about a health crisis, but everyone is talking about, you know, the works of history about the cholera epidemic, the Black Plague,
right.
You know, the pandemic of 1918-19. So those are not my areas of specialty. I haven't really read much about them. And I, of course, in the spare time I don't have, I'd like to do that.
Yeah.
What has been part of my psyche as both as an historian and as someone who wrote about the Jewish 20th century, this last book, and about Lucy Davidovich, this American who went to Poland in 1938, and she had a very dramatic flight, meaning it as in fleeing.
Right.
After the signing of the Hitler-Stalin Pact at the end of August 1938, she had to take a train and like a day's notice, sort of a day or two's notice, from the city of Vilna, which is today Vilnius in Lithuania, to Warsaw, and a train from Warsaw to Berlin, which was, of course, by then completely Nazified, and then from Berlin to Copenhagen to get a ship, because the ports of Poland were closed, the ports on the Baltic. And the only way she could get back to the United States was from Copenhagen. And she was fortunate. She was an American citizen, had an American passport. So I do not think, you know, people think you can learn lessons from history. I think a good historian will tell you that you don't really learn lessons, but you learn about why we are where we are. That's what it helps you think about. And so I don't really have lessons to derive from the past, but I have thought a lot about the resiliency of those I've read about in periods of crisis. And again, there's no magic bullet. I don't know why certain people are resilient and others are not. Let's start with that. I think why will some people emerge from this pandemic stronger or more resolved to change their lives? And why will other people emerge from this pandemic depressed or crushed by it? And I don't think there's a magic bullet or wand about why that is. I think that hardship makes certain people more, resilient, and hardship crushes other people. I've used that word again, but I have been thinking a lot about the individuals that I studied and who emerged, with more resilience. And I thought about one figure in particular, and I actually looked at the beginning of the crisis. I asked colleagues of mine for his obituary. So this is a figure named Artur Eisenbach, who was a Polish Jewish historian who lived through the communist period and ended up at the end of his life going to Israel. But this is someone who lived under a totalitarian regime. He lived in interwar Poland in freedom, and then he lived under the communists, and he lost his first major manuscript and had to rewrite it. And I really I think about Eisenbach, like what it took to have this fortitude and the strength to rewrite a book that he'd already written.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Lucy Davidovich is a person of great fortitude and strength, but I mean, she was very fortunate. In the sense that she was an American, she could get out of Europe. But she was lucky to get out of Europe, because she was a Jew too. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, is that I do think about what it means to retain a forward-looking life when you have crisis. Now, this pandemic is global. It's affecting everyone. It doesn't care about social class or ethnicity, gender. I mean, it's universally disastrous.
Certainly.
The crises that Lucy Davidovich was involved with were very specific. She lived through the targeting of the civilian Jewish population, and that's what she narrated in her life. The enemy was known, if you will, and was visible and was political. And right. This pandemic is more, what's the word? It's more Catholic is the word. It affects everyone, and it's somewhat invisible. Sure. So it has a very, very different, it's very different.
Right. That's fair. And I didn't think it was, the same by any stretch, but maybe, I don't know, maybe there was something she had written or something in particular that was directly analogous, but, that was me reaching a little bit. And, I think to your points of resilience, that's certainly, it can be very difficult to understand why one is resilient and another isn't. There's certain people who, they'd like to think it's just based on someone's character and the strength of their resolve. But no, I mean, humans are very complicated, and there's endless elements that go into it. And, how affected someone was by the pandemic, I think plays a big role. A nurse or a doctor on the front line might have a little harder time bouncing back than someone like me who, has been largely, unaffected, besides having to stay home and whatnot. So,
I mean, one of the things that I think, and I've thought about this too, is the whole issue of time, because, we've been sheltered in place for roughly 2 months, give or take, maybe 9, the siege of Leningrad was 300 days, right? Jews and other civilians were caught up in the war, in World War II from, 1939 to 1945, years and years and years. So I think about that a lot as we all are beginning to this is all beginning to wear thin for many of us. It's getting old, right? The masks, the sheltering in place, the not being able to socialize, the Zooming, the things we talked about. It's only been 9 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, God forbid it's going to go much longer, but we better be more resilient because it may be longer. And we need to think about how to stay strong enough and how to maintain the social bonds and to keep the food chain going, all the things, because 9 weeks in the space of other world crises, not so long, people.
Right, it's very short.
Vacation, people,
Right. I know. I think it's in part because, nowadays society moves so quickly and things are coming at us from all angles. We have such awareness of things going on globally, and information is, on top of us. And, alluding to, the emails we get from the university, from every branch. I mean, it's just, time is going almost as fast as it's ever gone in the past. So despite it only being 9 weeks, it feels much longer to many people. They can't believe that it's only been 2 months. It feels like, almost a year. If we think about what we were doing before this happened, it's such a distant memory. But no, I certainly agreed. I think that plays into the idea that history, maybe doesn't teach us lessons, but it gives us better context,
Right.
and it helps us understand other
I
moments.
also think one of the challenges, frankly, is for Americans, because Americans, for reasons that are an historian of America could do better than I could. Americans have such a deep-seated sense of optimism, and that things will get better. That the linear movement of our country's history is only for the better.
Right.
And the post-war years, right, from 1950 to say 2008 or something, that was generally speaking true. There an expanding economy. If you're African American, there are lots of African American, there are lots of exceptions to it, but
Right.
the general mythology was of an expanding economy and expanding opportunity.
Right.
And Americans are not used to, they're not used to having to, they're not used to the fact that maybe that's not true. I'll give you an example. During 9/11, I have a friend who teaches in the community college system in New York. And many of her students come from all over the world, some of them from refugee families, immigrant families, certainly working class families, that's for sure. And 9/11, obviously, for New York was devastating and horrible and full of terror. And, I would never minimize how horrible it was. But for many New Yorkers who were of a certain social class, it was such a shock that anything like that could happen in the country. My colleagues and friends, students, they kind of looked and said, "What's the matter with you people?" Meaning Americans. Like, we have natural disasters all the time, or I haven't seen my mother in 20 years, or this, the health in our country is not good. Whatever it was more like, get with the program, Americans. The life is precarious, and you just have been protected by it. And I think that's kind of that's where the study of history, life is precarious.
Yeah.
And this particular post-war American boom, we can historicize it. It's not forever.
Right.
And the pandemic is showing us that. Will we bounce back? I think we will. And I have great confidence in I do like Andrew Cuomo. New Yorkers are tough. I think that's true. But that sort of linear, it's always going to get better mythology, I think has to be challenged.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of, it's ingrained in us, this the American exceptionalism, this idea that, we are at the top of the hill, we're that beacon, we're that shining light. I think it is very hard, but no, absolutely. COVID exposes that the world is dangerous. It is scary. Life isn't fair. These feel almost like cliched phrases, but they are right. True. We need those reminders. We were certainly, we've been incredibly safe for a while, despite right. certain events, 9/11, of course, but for the most part, the average American is extremely safe, and we almost create different things in our culture to conjure up fear so that we have this fear response because we were too safe, almost to an element. But so sort of pivoting a little bit to a different kind of question, you pointed out as an aside on the Mark Bernier show, which I listened to, the problem of people getting their news from virtually endless different online sources and picking and choosing what they want to see based on what they want to see. And I agree it's a problem, but my question for you would be, as a historian, would you rather in these times only have a few sources, like you stated on that aforementioned show, or is it better now in a pandemic that we have so many sources and, we'll be able to look back at this with such a wide perspective?
I don't know. I think, look, I don't want to get too political here, but we have a situation with someone at the top of the government who, in my view, is incompetent. I felt that before. So, those are my I think my issue is incompetency. It's not ideology. And, what we have a culture now that is very skeptical of expertise, because we have confused expertise, which I associate with wisdom, with elitism, this strange anti-elitism. And they're different things. An expert is someone who has years of training, who has years of experience, who is impartial about politics. So in general, we've had a gutting of expertise in this administration, ranging from the court system to the health system. So my problem is that the president gets free press. And that's my problem. And let's just talk about the outrageousness. You can inject a disinfectant and that's going to stop COVID-19. I mean, that's insanity.
Yeah.
And it's not scientific and it's not data driven and it's dangerous.
100%.
So my problem is that for a good segment of our population, they're going to get that as news and that's going to be seen as facts. And there's no vetting. That's a problem for me.
Right.
Do I think it's important that there are different perspectives politically, that people have access to a conservative point of view, a centrist point of view, a liberal point of view, a quote unquote radical or progressive point of view? Yes, I think it's important that there be a discourse, a dialogue, or there can be dissent. A healthy society has dissent, but the ascientific, anti-expertise, knowledge base that people, have learned through years and years, that I find somewhat terrifying, actually.
Certainly. No, I mean, it's not that's a big problem in terms of on the political side of things, people interpreting opinions as facts and faulty news being disseminated as factual information. But if I'm maybe divorcing it from the political angle a bit, like, I don't know, as a result of, this was something I was talking about with Neil Fryman, the managing editor of The Brew, someone, we both know, I have a long relationship with. He's a big fan of Twitter because you get all these interesting perspectives. And, at the same time, you have journalists who are breaking stories earlier on their Twitter feed, and you're also getting, Italian opera singers who are singing off their balcony. So I just think when we compare this pandemic to, say, previous cholera pandemics or the flu pandemics that we don't have that much information on, at least for me, I enjoy that there are these many different strands and streams of information going on, because it means we'll have more to document and people will be more knowledgeable of this, when it's over.
But the problem is, what do we do with the knowledge? I think that, look, as an historian, I can tell you, I work on the early modern period. So I have lots and lots of documentation. My colleagues who work in antiquity have a much more fixed record. It's a different, more is not necessarily better. You still have to be selective. You still have to discern. You still have to be able to evaluate what's of value, what's not of value. So yeah, is it great that I can open up my email and see someone in Milano singing? It's wonderful. I like it. Who doesn't like it? But
yeah,
more information is not necessarily more knowledge.
That's fair.
And I'm old school. I believe in depth.
Yeah.
Right. So
sure.
I'm not an academic for nothing, right? My stock in trade is depth. The people I know learn languages. We read things in their original languages. We tell our students things are complicated, so what is Twitter? 116 characters, whatever? I just don't know.
Yeah,
how
280,
many
but yeah.
280.
It's short, yes. No, absolutely. Being able to go deep on a certain topic is more meaningful than, many broad, very base, people speaking. Sorry, I'm a little distracted right now. It's 7:00, so New York is making quite a bit of noise. But I won't break for the shofar blast because
Okay.
I have you here.
Right.
So moving forward to sort of the final segment of this interview conversation is about the big book that has been released, From Left to Right, Lucy S. Davidovich, The New York Intellectuals and the Politics of Jewish History. I have the beautiful book here and its beautiful cover. Amazing. So 16 years in the making, correct? I mean, that's
Well,
give or take.
give or take. I always say more than a decade. I think saying a decade and a half would just I can't believe that. So let's just say more than a decade.
More than a decade, just a little more than a decade. So, the title alludes to the fact that Mrs. Davidovich's political affiliations and ideology changed over the years, from left to right, which I've heard you speak about. And it seems in today's political climate that an ideological shift is seen as a flip-flop and party lines are more divided than ever. How can we all take a page out of Mrs. Davidovich's book, Lucy's book here, and find a way to fine-tune and change our political opinions with less chastising and ridicule and more open-mindedness?
Okay. So by the way, it bobbled there too. I don't know if that's your internet or mine. So
Okay.
just it's a good question. We, again, partly the soundbite, we live in people want rigidity. And the fact is, look, it's actually a very big question you're asking, because what do we do about, so there was a recent debate about Daniel O'Donnell, who's one of the representatives of our district on Morningside Heights, wants to rename part of Jones Beach or something that's named after Robert Cairo, after Robert Moses. I'm sorry, Robert Cairo wrote The Power Broker. Because if you look at some of Robert Moses's attitudes, there may be racism in it, or the way he designed the park, or the whole thing with the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. Like, should they rename it because Wilson actually revealed that he wasn't this great champion of collective self-determination for nations, that he was a racist? These are very important discussions. So I believe fully in having a conversation about it. But I do find there's a kind of political correctness or cancel culture rigidity, which is if someone can't evolve, and that's,
right.
Thinking about Biden today. And look, I do not think bad behavior should be rewarded, right? Let's be very clear. If someone perpetrated crimes against someone, I don't really believe in the statute of limitations. That should be revealed. But, history does change. And so people can change. One of the best examples is, I want to get this right. Oh God. I'm thinking about Lyndon Johnson or Yitzhak Rabin, right?
Okay.
Lyndon Johnson changed politically in his career, right, to support, the Voting Rights Act. Yitzhak Rabin changed when he was prime minister of Israel from being a real hawk to seeing the need for negotiation with the Palestinians. You want to accuse these people of being inconsistent, or do you want to say that they've had their eyes opened and they saw that they wanted to be on the right side of history? Yeah. So look, Lucy Davidovich moved from left to right for all kinds of reasons, and this isn't the place to have a full-blown discussion of her book, but she kind of said, I'm allowed to change politically. I see different things now. I'm concerned about anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party. I'm concerned about anti-Israel sentiment among the radical left. She said, I've renegotiated, I've rethought my politics. I don't see what's wrong with that. She was very clear about why she moved politically. She wasn't an opportunist. Her views were unpopular. So more credit to her, whether or not you agree or disagree.
Absolutely.
So the accusation that someone's flip-flopping is, I think, again, a soundbite and not particularly helpful.
Certainly. No, I mean, I think maybe part of the reason that it's a little harder for people to shift political opinions or ideas, and maybe even shift entire ideologies, is because there's such heavy documentation, and there's this hyper awareness of what everybody's doing, in part because of all these different information streams that we have and people's personal Twitter feeds. So as soon as someone sees that someone's kind of changing, they're quick to point fingers and the ridicule, as I mentioned, and chastising, and the person gets afraid and they go back to the base. They go back to what's comfortable, because it's tough to be a Lucy type of person in this and have unpopular opinions. I feel like now more than ever, because there's the masses come at you with their online pitchforks, and
Right.
it's very, very difficult. So you were featured in the Wall Street Journal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I read the article. A couple of questions regarding the article and tying them into,
The review. It was a review of the book.
Right. Yeah. The
Right,
review of the book. So something I read about Lucy in the article was that she salvaged the YIVO library after World War II when she went back over, which was the equivalent to essentially saving the Library of Alexandria, but for Yiddish culture. So what culture is being lost today, either as a result of the pandemic and the quarantine, or even before this broke out, just as a result of globalization and the commodification and crushing of smaller subcultures?
Okay, well, so that's a great question, but in terms of globalization and the commodification of subcultures, that's been going on for a long time. I mean,
Right,
I think about,
right.
again, Professor Delbora, that didn't start today, right? So that's a different set of issues than what Lucy was involved with, if you don't mind. I mean, that has globalization, the economy, linguistic. I mean, there's an organization in New York that I love. It's called the Endangered Language Alliance, right? Mm-hmm. And they set about trying to document all, like, the 150 languages that are spoken in New York. I mean, that's something different. That's about, again, homogenization and acculturation and globalization, and that's a real problem. But that's different when you have the willful destruction of culture, right?
Yeah.
That's a byproduct of this economic shift. So I can tell you that at Rutgers in March, we were going to have this great event on a book, actually the book written by Ben Balint, who did the review of my book, but he wrote a book called Jerusalem, City of the Book, with someone named Meirav Mack, and that was about the Archives and Library of Jerusalem, which is a city dear to my heart and soul. But he wasn't going to be the only panelist. The other panelist, and this is a shout out to your viewers, was someone named Father Columbus Stewart. Father Columbus, and there was another one, another panelist, Bedros Dermatosian, who's an Armenian Jerusalemite. It was going to be fantastic, and we had to cancel it. But Father Columbus Stewart is a Benedictine monk, and he teaches at St. Joseph's in Minneapolis. But he personally goes around the world training local populations to digitize their archival and library holdings, to save them from attacks. And that's more like what Lucy did and other people did during World War II and afterwards. And so, for example, he went to Aleppo, and he's been to Mali. And we know that there's the political plundering of the indigenous cultures in those places. You know, the Taliban blew up the statues of Buddha, right, because they considered them idolatrous. And other political forces have plundered and destroyed and burned books. So that's terrible, and that's anti-humanistic and horrifying. And Columba has tried very, very hard to fight against that. And he's digitizing, and you can go on the website of his Hill manuscript collection housed in Minneapolis and see Syriac manuscripts, Muslim, Islamic manuscripts, and others, and Christian minorities. And I mean, the Hebrew University has digitized much of the Jewish. That's extremely, extremely important. But that's a different, what I'm trying to say, that's a different challenge than the globalization challenge. So kind of, to me, they're different. But Lucy was very, very important to salvaging the libraries of Vilna, the city of Vilna, when she worked in the Offenbach archival depot after the war. And I just want to make as we close up, which I think we probably have to do, is that I think when we're speaking about attacks on culture, the Nazis, and that's the period of her life, destroyed people, millions of people, but they also wanted to destroy culture. And I think that that's something we all have to be very vigilant about. So they actually deputized experts in Judaica and Hebrew and Yiddish, and they deputized them to destroy Jewish culture that way. So they wanted to create a museum of the extinct race, and they would kind of have, a museum where people could go through and you say, you see, those people used to exist and they don't, and that culture used to exist and it doesn't. Right. And because, thank God, they lost the war, much of their plundered material was then what remained of it. 25% of the 100 was kept, was salvaged, and then Lucy and others worked very hard to get that material out of Europe. Right. Now there's a debate about who took what and where did it go and who had the right to it. Sure. That's 70 years later. Now people are arguing about, should it have gone to YIVO? Should it have gone to the Hebrew University? Should it have gone to JTS?
Right. At least it was saved, but right.
Exactly. At least it was, now we have questions of restitution, but at least it was saved. And Columba's work is magnificent.
Yeah, no, I agree. The willful destruction of culture is definitely different. I guess maybe if there were any elements of sort of the passive destruction of culture that you've seen as a result of this pandemic, I don't know. And I think of when you were talking, I was thinking about willful destruction of culture that we've seen. I mean, restaurant culture, I think, is sort of forever changed. I mean, we'll see if it comes back in the way that it does. Right. I mean, of course, there's a lot of documentation on restaurant culture. I mean, Anthony Bourdain's shows and, some of the essay he wrote in the New Yorker, which is great. And, plenty of other examples. And now we live in a digital age. So many things are automatically digital as opposed to, the Benedictine monk who is now in the process of digitizing. So there's probably less of a concern of things being lost, but certainly I think some things will be lost or changed.
Right, but again, it's not willful. No one wants.
It's not willful. Yes, right. Nobody is.
And also, I agree with you about what we don't know what's going to come back.
Yeah.
But some of those are economic, technological changes that we were already, retail was already changing because of all consumer habits and online purchasing and the costs of all those kinds of things. So what's going to happen with the pandemic is that things that were not going to make it because of general changes probably won't rebound. Right. Restaurants, theater, music, culture, I mean, I have to believe that we will return if we feel safe. I have to believe that, but I'm not a prognosticator. I don't know what the future will bring.
I think that's fair. So as you mentioned, closing out here, one final question for you related to the Wall Street Journal article, a bit, not necessarily directly, but
you lagged there again.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, just sort
of.
You
might want to repeat that.
Yeah, I'll repeat. One final question for you, which is that, you had many planned book engagements that had to be postponed. And, I say postponed, not canceled, because I think that's a better way to frame it. As well as the big book party, which I know is disappointing, of course. And, a big book party is kind of akin to a graduation of sorts and can give a sense of closure for the writers. So, what have you been doing to sort of feel that sense of closure for the time being?
Well, if I really think about what I can't do this spring, it really upsets me. So I kind of repressed it a little bit. I had big plans to be in Israel. I was supposed to be in the UK, supposed to have a big party. But I just accept the fact that I can't do those things. I've been fortunate. Look, the book did get reviewed both in the Wall Street Journal and in commentary. The reviews were everything I could have hoped for. So I think for me, some of the closure of the book is I want people to read it, and I want to have good readers, meaning I want sensitive, thoughtful readers. And those reviews were very gratifying. So that's been wonderful. I have to say, that's been wonderful. I've also done several podcasts and radio interviews. I have another one this Monday. I may have one in a couple of weeks. So I'm sort of, the message is getting out there. I don't know what's going to happen now in the fall, because there was sort of the hope of rescheduling many things. And several of my talks that are at universities, people are saying, well, are you gonna, we don't know, you want to do it virtually, you want to do a webinar. And I haven't really decided to do that right now. So I don't know what to say. I think that, I'm getting the word out there about the book. I'm very excited about that.
Right.
But I don't know about the gatherings aspect that I'd anticipated. And I have to tell you the truth, I just don't know if next fall it makes sense to have a party. I just don't know, maybe just things happen and it just may not be the right thing to do. There are other celebrations that I can look forward to, and
right.
It's, it's okay. I really am trying to keep it in perspective. Yeah. It's disappointing, but we're healthy, we're safe, my family's safe and healthy. That's kind of, I don't mean to sound Pollyannish, but that's really more important.
No, I think it is. And yeah, the fall might be complicated, but hopefully, the spring, some of it can come back and some of these things can be rescheduled, because you do certainly deserve it. And, talking about that idea that there's so much information out there, we have so many different sources. One thing that happened as a result of the book being published was that a lot of young, interested Jews were talking about it on Twitter. And I sent you some things. I have a few more Twitter screen grabs to send you that my friend sent to me, who he saw people were talking about it. So, as a result, there maybe because it was released in a lockdown period, there was more time, more people have been reading now than previously. And I've been revisiting books that I didn't get a chance to read when I was in college, and revisiting some college notes and going over things, because we do have a little more time on our hands. So perhaps there's some positive there. But okay, well, thank you, Mom, Professor Sinkoff, Dr. Sinkoff, officially. Love you very much. Appreciate you being on the program, and I'll let you go have dinner.
Oh, great. Are you making it for me?
Very funny. Very funny. Okay, Mom. Bye-bye.
Okay. Talk to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.